the Soviet Union at the time to demoralize the West. They encouraged a lot of these Marxists, and one of the things we haven't yet touched on is the ideology of wokeness is really a new form of Marxism. It's a kind of race Marxism. I know this sounds like very abstract and crazy. I don't know if it does to you, but maybe to many people in your audience, so perhaps I can lay it out a little bit.
Can you explain what Marxism is as well?
Sure.
Yeah.
So Marxism was an ideology created obviously by Karl Marx and Engels, who funded him and assisted him. And the idea was very simple. The idea was that the way to understand human society is through the lens of oppression. We've talked about this before, right? There are some people who are the oppressors and some people who are oppressed. Who are the oppressors in Marx's original idea? The oppressors were the bourgeois, the capitalists, the people who owned what he called the means of production, the factories, the capital, the stock. Like you are now a member of the bourgeoisie, a capitalist. You own a business, right? And what he said was that you are oppressing your producer and everyone who works for you because you take their labor and you profit from it without giving them back the right amount of value in exchange. And by the way, just like with a lot of these other ideas, it was true in the sense that Marxism really is a reaction to the rampant abuse that was caused by the Industrial Revolution, in which, you had people sleeping in factories and chimney sweeps that were 12 years old up chimneys, dying, all of that, right? So as with all of these ideas, there is a kernel of truth. But what he said, and, the people who really practiced this idea the most were the Soviets and the Chinese communists, is, well, how do you solve this problem? Oh, very simple. You got to take from the oppressors and you've got to give to the oppressed, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. However, the problem is, it turns out that communism is effectively a great idea at the family level. Like, your family is a communist society, so is mine. Like, I go out to work, I earn money, we spend it together on the needs of my wife, my children, blah, blah, blah. That's communism, right? We share what one productive person produces. Other people do other jobs, they may not be paid as well, blah, blah, blah. The level of society doesn't really work because people are self-interested, and to make them not self-interested, to make them all give up everything for the needs of the state and of other people, you have to use a lot of force, right? Which is why you have to kill 50 million people in Russia, 50 million people in China to even make it happen. Now, what happened was, you got to remember, this is very important, people forget this. When the Soviet Union was created, it was not designed to be a country-wide phenomenon. The communists believed that rightly by the way, that the only way communism would work is if you made everyone in the world communist. Because if you made everyone communist, then no one could look at over the border and look at these evil capitalists having a great life. Everyone would be equally poor and then they'd be happy. That was the idea, right? And so the idea of the Russian Revolution wasn't about making Russia communist. It was about making the world communist. It was the world revolution. That's why the Soviet Union, the symbolism of the Soviet Union, it never had anything to do with Russia or the Soviet Union on the flag. It had the globe and the hammer and sickle. The point was, this ideology was meant to spread to the entire world. The problem was that when people saw what was actually happening in the Soviet Union, they really didn't want that. And most of all, people in Western societies, including the working class, who was supposed to be the oppressed and to overthrow their oppressive people, they didn't want that. They just wanted to have a nice life and to have a house and to blah, blah, blah. And so the Marxists in the West, they very quickly realized that this wasn't going to work. Western working class people were not going to overthrow the existing regime and have a Soviet-style revolution where they slaughter all the bourgeois and the capitalists. So they had to find a different way to approach it, which is why they invented this form of race Marxism. They said, no, you're not really oppressed because you're working class and you don't have capital. The reason you're oppressed is you're a man, you're gay, you're black, you're this, you're that. And that really landed with people, particularly multi-ethnic societies like ours, where we have a lot of people from minority backgrounds. It coincided with the sexual revolution. I know you've had my friend Louise Perry on the show.
Yeah.
I don't know if you talked about this, but the pill basically changes the relationship between men and women. Women are liberated, so now a lot of this stuff also happens. And so what happened in the 60s is a lot of educators in academia started teaching these ideas to students. And then you have successive generations of people who are now essentially trained to think that our societies were bad, What they were was about oppression, racism, bigotry, imperialism, colonialism, slavery, etc., which all of these things have a kernel of truth, and that kernel of truth is used to tell gigantic lies.